Metro Louisville is made up of 26 districts. This podcast gives you a chance to connect with your council member and learn about what's going down in your district. Welcome everyone to District Download. This episode, we are hitting right at spring, which at Metro Council, that means we are in budget season. So that is the topic for this episode. Joining me today, we have a full house. We have the Budget Committee here with us, leaders for the Budget Committee, and also Stephen Haig, Director for the Minority Caucus. Did I get that title right?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to go ahead and, like we've been doing for each of these episodes, kind of introduce the council members that we have with us, and then we're going to launch right into budget, because this is a really big topic that happens every single year, and we want to make sure we have an opportunity to kind of bring people into this process. So let's start with Budget Chair, Councilman Bill Hollander. Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Awesome. So go ahead, start with, what district do you represent?
I represent District 9, runs from Bellwood Avenue out to Frankfort Avenue, Shelbyville Road corridor out to past Hubbard's Lane. Takes in a bunch of neighborhoods, part of St. Matthews.
And how long have you been with council?
I was elected in 2014, reelected after 4 years, so I'm completing 8 years this year.
And you are no stranger to the Budget Committee, so talk about your experience with that as well.
Yeah, I think this is the 7th year that I've been on the Budget Committee. I actually attended most of the meetings the first year because it just seemed like the best way to sort of learn about Metro government. So the good thing about the Budget Committee, especially at budget season, is we have a lot of people who are not on the Budget Committee who attend various budget hearings just to learn and to ask questions. And, of course, everybody on the council is welcome to do that.
All right. Now, the other person in the room, Councilman Kevin Kramer, thank you for joining us, Vice Chair of the Budget Committee.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having us.
So, same question to you. What is your district?
I represent District 11, which is a considerably different district today than it was when I was first elected. I was elected to the first Metro Council, so I will be finishing, 20 years when we come to January. So I've been at this for a while. My current district runs from the edge of Jeffersontown out Taylorsville Road, between Taylorsville Road and I-64, out to 265, and then I go over to Shelbyville Road, all the way out, almost to the county line. I tease people that my new district looks like Tennessee, and I live on the western tip.
So what is your experience then with the Budget Committee, having a lot of experience just with Metro Council?
Yes, well, again, very much like Councilman Hollander, my first year or 2 years here, I attended a lot of the Budget Committee meetings, even if I wasn't a member of the committee. I mean, it's where the real decisions at the council were made. And so I'd look to the Minority Caucus Director to get a more accurate number of how many years I've been on budget, but let's just say it's been most of the years that I've been here. So pretty well acquainted with how it works.
So our topic today of budget, I don't want anyone to tune out just at that word.
Right.
Because you think about having to handle your own budget and you just kind of squirm a little bit and think like, oh, I don't want to do it. But this is so incredibly important for this committee, for Metro Council, but for Metro government, Metro Louisville. So let's start by simply setting the stage. Why does Metro Council do what it needs to do with the budget?
Well, we're required to by Kentucky statute. One of the express obligations of the Metro Council is to adopt a budget ordinance. And that's not unusual with any kind of government. Nearly every government I'm aware of, and certainly all cities and counties in Kentucky, are required to adopt an annual budget. And that's one of the priorities that we have to do. And we have to do it by June 30th because we're on a fiscal year that starts on July 1st. So one of the real obligations is to adopt a balanced budget by June 30th.
So if you put on my civics teacher hat, and I will tell you that it is one of the most fundamental ways of balancing checks and balances. It's one of the fundamental ways of balancing the way that government functions, and specifically the power of any one branch. And so the mayor presents a budget, and it's our responsibility to go back through and make sure it's approved. If I'm going to back up just a little bit to if folks hear budget and they think they want to tune out, and I would strongly encourage folks not to tune out because of budget, but actually to tune in. It's the budget process where the real work of government is discussed. It's in this committee where priorities are established, challenged, changed, it's in this committee where the real work of government happens. So if you're in any way, shape, or form interested in what the government does, this is the committee.
And this budget doesn't just fall out of the sky or out of thin air. There is an incredible amount of work that goes into this, and it starts well before we even get it here at City Hall. We don't create the budget here. So go ahead and explain kind of who all is involved in this process.
Well, the administration starts the budget preparation process before the first of the calendar year. So they're talking to departments about what their plans are, goals are, needs are in looking at the budget presentation. They're also trying to figure out what the revenue is going to be. At the same time, there are council members who are having meetings with members of the administration to talk about what the budget looks like. We get regular reports about how we're doing with the previous year's budget and what the revenue is. So we have some idea of what the revenue is going to look like in the following year. And then there are requests made by council members saying this is something that we would like to see in the budget. This is something that we would like to see cut in the budget, all those kind of conversations. Not everything that's discussed ends up in the mayor's recommended budget, but a lot of it does. So there is some input prior to the mayor making his recommendation. And then the mayor comes over and makes his recommendation, as he did on April 28th, I think. And then the review process really starts in earnest.
Yeah. And it's in that review process that the council really kicks into high gear. We have an opportunity then to ask questions of the folks who made decisions with last year's money. We have an opportunity to ask, how they arrived at this is a priority for this year versus some other priority that we may feel is important. And so that committee work is where I'd say the real nuts and bolts of the process is.
Now, as we're recording this, you're right, it came out on the 28th. So you've had a few days to kind of sink your teeth in it. When this podcast will be releasing, we will be in the middle of hearings. So let's talk about that hearing process. What is this? I mean, we're talking weeks and hours upon hours of hearings.
So there's preparation for the hearings, too. As soon as the budget comes out, there are questions that are sent to each agency or department. Asking a variety of things, any changes in their planned budget, what they're doing that they haven't done, what their head count is, what their org chart is, all sorts of information. And so that comes back to us from each department, and we get a report from our own staff about that, along with the agency responses prior to the hearing. So there's some preparation prior to the hearing. Then the hearing itself, we ask the head of every department to come, give a little presentation. We hope it's relatively short, and then we ask questions about anything that anybody wants to ask about. We try as best we can to keep it related to the budget. That doesn't always work completely, but that's the idea.
Yeah, I would concur.
I did some math. My math could be wrong. So if anyone wants to correct me on this, I tried to calculate it, and I think it's like over 37 hours of hearings total.
Well, my guess is you're short on that
because okay.
Because I think the way you did that is you put down what we have time scheduled for a hearing. And if we end up a day ending on schedule, it's a really good day. It's also a relatively rare day. So it will end up being, it's unlikely we'll keep within that time frame. It'll be a little longer than that.
So I was very ambitious to say 37. Okay.
Noted.
Yeah,
and there are 2 public hearing days
exactly.
that don't have
that,
a
I was
finished
gonna say,
time.
That is without the 2 public hearings.
Yeah.
So.
and we as I said, every council member can come and ask questions. So it can take, we let all the questions get answered. At some point, if the hearing has gone too long, we'll try to reschedule for a different time. We frankly try to avoid that because it just becomes very cumbersome if we're adding days at the end, and you also have to start making decisions about what the final budget's going to look like. But we do want people to get their questions answered, and there are always lots of questions.
I believe every year we've had at least 1 or 2 callbacks. So that's,
Okay. Right.
again, it's not the desire. The goal is to
Right.
take care of it on the day, but it's not uncommon to call the department back.
And sometimes when members of the public might tune into an initial hearing and they see that we ask a question and the answer wasn't provided to us, but they don't see a callback. Sometimes that answer comes in writing also, so we get that kind of material as well. But sometimes we do have callbacks, right?
So in these hearings, what are you guys looking for? Because obviously the numbers are all there for you that were provided from the administration. What are you looking for in these hearings?
Well, what's behind the numbers? Why a decision has been made to do a particular thing? I'll give you one example. In the corrections department, I was looking at their budget today. There is no money for the community corrections center, okay? And there wasn't any money last year. So I remember what the answer was last year. I'm curious as to whether the answer is going to be the same, which is there's not enough staff for that location. I think that is the answer. In fact, I've already asked a little bit today about it. But that's the kind of thing you're asking about. Is there a plan at some point in the future to open that center again? There are lots of continuing things. I know Councilman Kramer probably is going to want to talk about deferred maintenance and about a couple of buildings that we are no longer going to be using and what's going to happen to them. And some of these things take several years until they're resolved. And so one of the questions is, why it hasn't been done yet? What more do you need? You may want to get into that. But what you're trying to ask is what's behind the numbers? What's the decision that's behind the numbers?
Yeah, and going back to memory, right? So my first probably 2 or 3 years here, I think one of the biggest things I would do is go through and look for the big discrepancies. Where are we spending a lot more money this year than we spent last year? Or where's there significant savings this year that we expended last year? What changed? So, and again, that's my first. That never changes, so I'll still be doing that. I have a sense of about what it should cost to tear down 2 buildings, and if there's only half as much money in there as I think there should be, then yeah, I'm going to ask that question, which goes into the discussion about the fiscal court building that we might have later. And pools, for example, you look at how much it costs to run pools, and you look and say, well, is there enough money in the budget this year to continue that? And what about the pools that we know are in trouble? So. It's a matter of just paying attention to those numbers and seeing where the changes are and figuring out, is there going to be enough money to do the things that you think are important, and are there dollars in there for programs, and you're wondering, we were told that we needed this much money for support to do some of the grant writing, for example, and was 1.3 million, I think was the number. Then you start looking around, well, there's 1.3 million in one department, and there's more money in another department for grant writers and money in another department. And then the question becomes, when we looked at 1.3, where did that number come from? And I don't know if Bill's asked that question yet. I suspect he probably has. Usually when I have a good question, Bill's already asked it.
Team effort here is what I'm getting. So when you come across things like that, you're going through the hearings, you're asking these questions, what happens at that point? How are changes made? And I think a lot of people are actually curious. The basic question is, does the budget even change from what you get?
Yes, it changes every year. I will say that some departments do not change very much. So sometimes we hear, well, the Metro Council just passes the budget without looking at it, without changing it, and that clearly is not true. On the other hand, we have a fire department, a Louisville Fire Department, and they have fire trucks and they have firefighters, and unless there's a service level change, and there usually isn't, there's not a whole lot you can do with changing the Louisville Fire Department's budget. So I don't know, I'm certainly not prejudging this, but I doubt there'll be a dramatic change in what's proposed to run the Louisville Fire Department. That's just an example. And, it's a pretty big chunk of change that goes to the Louisville Fire Department. And so that when people look, are you making any changes, that's one, maybe there won't be any significant changes. But the process, I think, is you ask questions, you listen, you then have conversations with other council members about what you've heard, and eventually you try to come to some consensus about this is the kind of changes that we would, or these are the kind of changes that we would like to see and that a majority of people want to see. And so it's a collaborative process. And it really does come about through those hearings and through the written material that we get from the departments. It's a very important part of the process.
A good bit of it, we rely on folks who are paying attention and coming and asking us questions and, making clear that this is important to them, this is what they want in there. But there will be, I assure you, in that last 2 weeks, conversations that Bill and I will have, and we will walk away from that conversation with an understanding that each of us is going to start making phone calls. We'll decide who's going to call whom, and we'll reach out and say, this is where we are in the budget process. We understood this is kind of where you are, and this is what we think might be possible. And again, it's a collaborative effort, and we don't want anybody on the day that the budget goes before the council or the committee for a vote. We don't want anybody in that room to be surprised and to come back and say, oh, you sneaked this in there, or how did this get left out? We want to make sure everybody knows this is exactly where we are. Our goal, we're not always successful, but our goal is that when it goes to the budget committee, the ordinance that we took to the budget committee will get passed out of the budget committee. We want that ordinance to pass. Inevitably, there are going to be small amendments and things, but we try to get as much of that done ahead of time as we can. We certainly don't want to have a big contentious discussion in that last meeting. But by then, we've done a lot of work. We're hoping that it holds together.
How does the public, you kind of alluded to that, how does the public fit into this conversation? We've already mentioned there are 2 public hearings. Go through the details of those and why this is so important.
Well, I think they fit a couple of ways. We'll talk about the hearings. We'll talk about the public comment forum. People also just reach out to their Metro Council members. I mean, I've heard from several members of the public who are particularly interested in a particular department or a particular program already this week about, I'm surprised to see this in the budget, or I was surprised not to see this in the budget. So those conversations are happening as well. Then formally, we have 2 public hearings, May 18th at 6 o'clock and June 2nd at 6 o'clock, where people can sign up and speak. They actually have to sign up the day before, between 3 and 4:30, the day before each of those May 18th and June 2nd hearings. And we limit the time that speakers can speak, but anybody can come and speak. If you're an external agency who's asked for money, we ask that only one person from that agency come and speak about that request. But it's an important part of the process. We used to just have 1, I think. We now have 2. We also have a public hearing or a public comment forum, which is actually online now, and you can get all of this at the Metro Council website. So just put Metro Council, Louisville Metro Council in your search engine, and it'll tell you how to do all of these things. The public comment forum is up right now, and it closes on June 3rd at 5 o'clock, and all of that will be disseminated to council members.
And there remains the face-to-face interactions
Absolutely.
that we have every day in our districts, right? I don't stop going to Kroger just because it's budget season. So,
Do you get stopped in Kroger regularly during these 2 months?
I tend to have lots of conversations. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have an example? Because I think people, kind of like we said in the beginning, people are overwhelmed at their own budgets. The thought of making a difference or feeling like their voice could possibly be heard for such a large budget that has a lot of impact, that might be really overwhelming. And so people might simply not attempt. Is there any examples you guys might have to show like there is real impact here from listening to everyone?
If I could, this time I'll allude to what I think Bill's going to tell you. For a number of years, colleagues of mine, probably preceding Bill's election, looked at how much money we were spending on roads. And we knew that every year we were getting further and further and further behind on maintenance. We had roads that were literally crumbling and when we weren't fixing them. And we knew we had to do something different. So we started pushing forward, talking about trying to figure out how to get that done. Of course, we're getting phone calls all the time saying this road or that road. We're bumping into people at Kroger who are saying, this is a problem. And so finally we were able to get enough folks on the council to say, hey, we need to take this seriously. And we committed, $20 million a year to roads for, I think we agreed it needed to be for at least 10 years. I think that's going to come up again in the budget cycle this year. But I think that's a really good example of where people said, hey, this is important to us. And we were able to get that taken care of. It would surprise me if Bill doesn't want to talk, at least for a moment, about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
I will on a couple other things too, but the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is something that we heard, I think, extremely effectively. People come to council not just during budget season, but during the public comment periods, and we had speakers who talked about the need for affordable housing for young people and for older people and for people in various phases of their life, and it made a real impression on the council, I think, and so I think it built support for affordable housing, and that's something that really has changed pretty dramatically in terms of our budget since 2015. I'll talk about a couple of smaller pieces too. Last year, there are two budget books. There's the detail book and there's the executive book. I would recommend you look first at the executive book. It's a little easier to digest. But the detail book has a lot of detail in it. And we have some people who are quite interested in corrections. And they contacted me and some other members about a line item in the budget which showed telephone receipts from corrections at $700,000. And what this is, and it's been there for a long time, what this means is that as people make telephone calls from jail, we were making, this is not just recovering our costs, we were dropping to the bottom line $700,000, charging essentially people who were calling loved ones $700,000. And that seemed wrong to a number of us, and so we dropped that down and suggested that contract be rebid. It's still in there for $350,000. I think that will change, frankly. I think that's a bit of a placeholder. But that's the kind of relatively small thing that probably wouldn't have gotten a lot of attention if somebody hadn't contacted us and said, do you really want to do this? I mean, you're trying to get people who are in jail back into productive life. You're actually putting in programs to help them do that, and yet you're making it extremely expensive for them to keep in touch with their families while they're in jail. So that's one. Another one, there's money in the budget now for a $700,000 energy innovation fund. We passed a renewable energy resolution, a goal of council, and one of the things we did, the first thing actually, was there's an energy manager who is saving the city substantial amounts of money by doing contracts, redoing contracts and other kind of energy innovations. We had some people last year who said, if you really want to build on this, why don't you create a fund and use that money for additional energy innovations or potential renewable energy projects? And we passed an ordinance actually like that, so there's now an energy innovation fund in the budget of $700,000. Again, that was not my idea. That was the idea of people who said there's a way to build on what you're doing. I think it's a good idea.
So the moral is that there is the possibility for real impact for people that are listening and people we want to encourage to sign up, send in those forms, speak directly to your council person.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So let's talk specifics about this budget. With what you've been able to digest since in the last 5 days, what stands out to you? This is also a large budget. It's a big number that's tied to this. So unpack some of it for people.
It's a lot better to be dealing with this budget than to be dealing with a budget where you're cutting services and eliminating positions and sometimes whole departments. There is still work to be done to decide the best way to fund the revenue that's available to us, and it's more revenue than we anticipated. Our economy is held up better. We have better resources from the state, certainly a lot better resources from the federal government, particularly pandemic related. So it's in that respect, it's a lot better than maybe what we would have expected a couple of years ago as we were beginning this. I think it's important, and we'll talk about as part of the budget process how we do this. I think it's important that we be prudent with that money, and that we also think about saving some of it for the future. So the mayor has actually proposed that we save some of the money for the future. We'll see what we do with that. Some of it in the rainy day fund, some of it just set aside for operating expenses in fiscal year 24, maybe 25. So it's a good opportunity, I think.
I agree. It's a much better place to be where we're trying to figure out how do we use the money that is one-time revenue to hopefully into the future find ways to generate savings. I told the mayor on a call the other day, I will not be the person who speaks out against saving money. I think we need to look at how we can save, how we can stick some aside for savings. But at the same time, we're having that conversation. We also need to recognize that sometimes the best way you can save money is by paying for something today that's going to cost you considerably more 2 years from now. So again, let me reiterate, I think saving money is a great idea, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't put some into savings. I think we just need to have a conversation in this process, knowing how much is there. How do we make sure that we're not just focused on this 1 year budget? Because in the past, I think, again, to Councilman Hollander's point, we've had several years where every bit of the focus was on this year. It's like, just, we have to get through this year. I'm really grateful we're not in that place this year. I think we're in a place where we can look out 3 and 4 and 5 years and make some decisions, I think, that have an impact down the road on savings.
And this budget, just with timing, is going to be impacting a new mayor as well. So it's kind of setting up the city for success, no matter who is going to be leading the city, right?
Yes. And then, again, I think that's why I think we're in agreement on the savings piece. I think you want to make sure that the next mayor starts off in a better place than we have been in.
Absolutely. And I asked actually this afternoon, I asked if there was money in the budget for a transition to a new administration, and there is, and there should be. And so a relatively small amount, but shortly after Election Day, there will be people working in that transition.
Are there any specifics from this budget that you're kind of looking at? Or you, when hearings are coming up, this is something that you're going to be looking at or wanting to question?
I think the sustainability of programs is something that I'm interested in, so particularly if we've got sort of one-time money and we think revenue is not going to keep up with where it is. How sustainable are the programs that are being proposed? I think that's always a worthy question to ask. Beyond that, I don't know. We'll just have to see what comes out of the hearings.
Well, I think dovetailing with that, in terms of debt, we're in a year where we have more revenue than we've had, and yet this budget has over $100 million in borrowing. And if we're in a good place now, we take on that debt. That means that 4 years from now, 5 years from now, somebody else can pay that back. And so, I think we'll be looking at, and again, I don't think I'm alone in this. I think we'll be looking at, is it necessary to really borrow all of that? Is there a way we can do some of that with excess revenue? Is there, I know Bill will agree. It's, over the years, we start with a revenue number that we think we're going to have, and it's not uncommon that in the process we realize that there are funds that are overlooked in this place, or quite honestly, there are projects that we may have funded that came in under budget, and so it's not uncommon that we'll figure out that there's some extra money, and I would like to think that if we are able to do that extra money would be spent instead of borrowing money to take care of some of those things with just general revenue.
One of the things we'll be looking at in the very first hearing is, what our borrowing is compared to other cities. But we're way below the borrowing limit for the city, but that's an astronomical number. We'll also be looking at where our rainy day fund is at this point, but that's money that's unallocated that sits in a fund, and it can be used when you have real emergencies. We thought we would be potentially tapping that at the beginning of the pandemic when we really didn't know what was going to happen to things like net profits and occupational license fees in the city. And we were not impacted as much as we feared, but you really are very happy that you have that rainy day fund when those kind of things happen. So we've been growing that, but by small amounts. Our revenue has been growing faster, and that means the percentage of general fund that we could cover with the rainy day fund has been declining. We want to increase that a little bit this year. We'll be talking Monday about how much the proposal is to increase that and how prudent it is to do that.
And our deferred maintenance costs are not going down, and the amount of money that we're putting in this budget, or at least initial look through, the amount of money there for deferred maintenance is not a great deal more than past years. And every year we're getting further behind on deferred maintenance. We're not making headway. So every department that comes, I'm sure, is going to answer some questions about deferred maintenance in their departments. I mean, facilities and parks most completely, but I think across the board.
One of the things that Councilman Hollander referenced was the $1.3 billion that we have to spend. It's coming from a lot of different sources. And the first hearing we have is on revenue. It's where it comes from, and as you mentioned, occupational and that. Would you all mind talking a little bit so that people understand kind of what makes up our general fund, but then also what external kind of groups, whether it's the state or federal, have a role in the budgeting process?
Yeah, so the general fund basically is made up by occupational license fees. And that's if you work in the city, the percentage is taken out of your paycheck and comes directly to Louisville Metro. Net profits, and that's a very volatile number. It's very high this year. We do not anticipate, or at least the forecast is it won't be as high next year. So we actually forecast a decline in that. In other words, this is an unusual number, and you don't want to be building a budget based on a number that's not going to repeat next year. So that's a big one. Real estate taxes are a big piece of the budget. We also have agency receipts. You have to pay to do various things, different kinds of permits that you get. We get money from the state on municipal road aid. That's used in this budget, the proposed budget, entirely for paving, I think, at this point. We get a lot of money from the federal government on community development block grants and other kind of grants. And so there's a variety of sources. But the local taxes are basically the real estate taxes. I didn't mention insurance premium taxes. That's another about $70 million general fund revenue stream.
Personal property tax.
Right. Right.
As we move into the budget discussion, the federal government is looking at I forget what the acronym is. It stands for, but BIL. It's
bipartisan infrastructure
there
law.
you go.
Yep.
And it will be largely on infrastructure and capital projects and things like that. That begins as a part of the conversation to get us out of COVID and all of what COVID did. So we've put a lot of hope that there's going to be some real infrastructure money coming to Louisville as a result of that. As the economy shifts, as it looks like it is, and Congress hasn't acted on that yet, we don't want to put all of our eggs in that basket and hope that all of our capital will be taken care of, that all of our capital improvements are taken care of, because there's just no way to know what Congress is going to do. And so that's the other piece is as we move down this road, I think we're watching, shifting tables, trying to figure out where we're gonna put things, and we do the best we can to predict where we think it's going to be. And some years we're pretty successful, and other years we go back and do adjustments in November, December.
And then the other part of this is we have other funds that have already been expended, like the American Recovery Program and other Build Back Better, or not Build Back Better, but the CARES Act, those types of things. They are not part of this budget, and yet in many ways they will affect this in future budgets.
Absolutely.
Could you all talk about that just a little bit?
Sure. So we are in the final stages of appropriating $388 million in the American Rescue Plan. And we have decided to do that in tandem with the current budget. So what we have tried to do, I think fairly successfully, is to appropriate most of that money for one-time expenses. So they are not continuing. But that's not complete. So there are some programs that are funded out of ARP, we call American Rescue Plan money, ARP, that will continue on and or may continue on, are funded for 3 or 4 years. So one of the questions is, what's going to happen when those are over? I mean, I think some of the things we're trying are really, really extremely critical. Many of them deal with our public safety and gun violence issues in the community. And so we are trying some things. Whether those will continue after the ARP dollars are gone, I don't know. That'll be a decision for other members of the council. I'll be gone. We'll have a new mayor at that time. So those conversations are happening too. Then the ARP money also affects things like Councilman Kramer mentioned, the pools. So we know we have at least a couple neighborhood pools that need a lot of work. And had ARP money not been available to fund the renovation of those pools, we'd have found that money in the capital budget this time, I'm confident. But the ARP proposal funds those improvements. Now, it may not fund them completely. We'll find out about that. But, the ARP money has been very helpful in doing some of the things that we otherwise might have done out of our budget. And of course, that's the whole point of the rescue plan.
And things we're very grateful that we're able to do. Libraries. Bill and I are both, staunch advocates of the libraries and are really happy about how that unfolded. That said, if we build 2 new libraries and remodel a couple others, it's great to get that taken care of in this budget, and I could not be more happy. We have to recognize, though, that when we build a new library, that means we're going to have to staff that new library. And so, again, while it may not have a direct impact on this year's budget, it certainly will have an impact on future budgets.
It's absolutely right. And I'd have to say, and certainly I'm as guilty as anybody else, I think we are much better at building things than we are at operating them long term.
Maintaining them.
And maintaining them. But even operating. I mean, we have, we've built in the last 10 years, I guess, 3 really terrific regional libraries. But I don't, and certainly the library operating budget has increased some, but I don't think it's increased commensurate in my view. And Councilman Kramer's right. Now we're talking about expanding Portland and reopening Parkland and reopening Fern Creek, all of which I very much support. But eventually the money will have to come to operate those libraries too.
Is there anything you want to take this moment to really express to people? This is kind of your soapbox moment for budget. Are we missing anything? What is your takeaway from this?
I would just encourage people to participate and to watch. All of these hearings are on Metro TV. They're all on Facebook. They're all available from the Metro Council website. I said at the outset that I've always encouraged council members, even who are not on the budget committee, to attend the hearings, watch the hearings, because I think it's the best way to learn about city government. Its strengths, its weaknesses, what it should be doing and is not doing, and what it's doing well. And the same is true of the public. If you really want to dig in and learn about city government, it's a great way to do it. You better pack your lunch, because we'll be there for more than 37 hours. But tune in when you can. I think it's important.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the thing I would say is, if you really want to understand what the priorities are of the mayor, if you want to understand what the priorities are of Councilman Hollander or Councilman Kramer, now's the time. Right? Pay attention to what's going on in the budget hearings. The questions that will be asked will betray what councilmen think is important. And the ultimate budget, the budget that we vote on in the end of June, will be a clear indication of what 26 of us think needs to move forward. And Bill's been chair of the budget committee for a couple of years, and I don't want to let this slip away without saying he has worked incredibly hard in each of these years to get as close to unanimous support for the budget as we could get. I think there were at least 2 years in there where we thought we had unanimous support, and we got on the floor and found out that something happened with 1 or 2 members. But the goal is never to get a budget that passes by 14 votes. And that's never been true for either one of us. And again, being the chair of the budget committee and from the majority caucus, I think there's more pressure on his shoulders than mine. But it's important to us that the budget that comes out at the end of June reflects the priorities of the Metro Council, which is made up of 26 individuals and not just one.
Am I missing anything?
The only other thing I thought of was there has been a lot of discussion in previous years about the pension obligation and what effect that has had on our budget and some of the tightness that we had a few years ago.
Great question. So and people need to realize this. So, our cuts in the budget a few years ago were pension driven. So we had 12% increases in our pension costs year on. There have been some changes since then. We have a new county employees retirement system board, and we're coming to, we hope, an end to that, but we're not quite done with it. So the hazardous duty employees have a 12% pension rate increase built into this budget. Non-hazardous duty employees, it's basically flat. Next year, we've been told it will be flat for both categories. But what that means for hazardous duty, for example, you pay a percentage of the salary for every police officer, fire, correction. And so we've had significant salary increases in all of those areas, and certainly needed them. And then you're adding an additional pension cost for all those salary increases, plus the rate is going up by 12%. So, for example, I looked at the police budget. There's a significant increase in the police budget. $10 million of that is an increase in the retirement costs for police. So you're going to see that in certainly all of the public safety and hazardous duty ranks. And it's important. You're going to see lots of personnel increases, and one of the things we'll talk about a lot at the budget hearings is when you see a big personnel increase, that does not mean there are more people. It means that we gave pretty big salary increases in order to keep the government running, as other employers have needed to give salary increases and in order to retain and attract people, not just policemen but other people, and certainly corrections. There's been a lot of publicity about that, but that's a really important point, Steve. We've had substantial increases in the retirement cost, and they're still there in this budget, at least on the hazardous duty side.
Those are some of the costs, like you're talking about. This can't change. This number we have.
No,
to fulfill this.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That number comes from that percentage comes from the state, and this is the amount we have. Actually, most of the personnel lines we can't really affect. I mean, and it's as you look through the detail of the budget, most of our expense throughout government is personnel. We're basically a people business, serving people. So, that's. And a lot of that is the increase is baked in with these salary increases.
Well, I want to thank everyone for being here today. I think this was extremely helpful, extremely informative. Hopefully it'll be kind of a reference point for people. If you have any questions about the budget, you can come back to this and kind of hear some of these things out. And hopefully it will encourage other people to participate. So hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, we survive the next 2 months, everyone at this table. And we can come back to the table and kind of work through, what just happened. But I really appreciate everyone coming here today and talking about this. So
Happy to be with you. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.